you still don't feel confident, you can call us, give us the SKU number on the bottom, and we'll have staff reevaluate to see if anything has changed. But what they used to normally do as standard business practice, their staff, their lower-end ones, would constantly check all the different generic memos. And if they found that anything laws were changed that would be updated, they would just automatically update it for us. But then we wouldn't be getting charged every single time. We had so much more structure. So we need people that have legitimate city experience working for a municipality. And sometimes those who come from smaller cities work better because they've had to delve into every aspect. I've noticed management that come from larger cities, mass scale, that have so many checks and balances, they do not have a good wide range experience of having to do everything. So that's one of my things I've noticed over the years. It's just from the different city managers we've had. So we need strong leadership that has actual city experience and who will actually at least commit to being there for at least a good solid 3 to 5 years. But the problem is, even when I would come across people through the union, and I was very active even on the district council, if I met people at other cities I thought that would be really good, I would always sit there and try to, hey, I think would you ever consider, we got good benefits? That was the going thing with the city. We had decent benefits. But what would happen is people would Google our city and they would see all the news articles about the city. And then people just, or they would talk to other individuals who've crossed paths. Everyone crossed paths in public entities in some shape or form. And they would say no. And so it's unfortunate, but like I tell people, we have to rebrand the city in order to really attract high caliber individuals, especially at the upper levels. So it would be overhaul of our elected leaders and having those people a solid core management team. And then it could really right the ship.
Okay. Now tell me, what's bad in Carson, but probably working as intended?
Would you mind repeating that again? Because all I focus on the bad part. I was like,
what's probably not working as well, but it's probably working as intended?
Communications. One of the biggest issues I always had was the fact of lack of communication. We have all the means and the resources to easily get the word out. But like I explained to people, it doesn't matter in this day and age of electronics, websites, and stuff like that. It's done purposely that way. They do not want the public to be educated. That is one of the things I reap the benefit of working for individuals who share that knowledge. And they all told me, we're not always going to be here. We need to transfer that knowledge to somebody who will be able to understand it and comprehend it and therefore build from it. And then when your time, you should be sharing with others. And so I always gave people the benefit of sharing that information because regardless of what their status was at the city, because I was afforded that as a young buck starting out. Even, all these higher ups didn't have to give me time of day, or anything like that, but they did. And so I always afford people the opportunity. But I think the way that communications is purposely left just as it is, because what elected official would want an engaged and informed community that would have the ability to hold them accountable? And I always tell people, you got to be willing to go the distance. When residents would come to the council meetings, they would come in full on, you'll have 200 people. And I tell people, you got to go the distance, you got to keep going. Because what they're going to do is they're going to wait you out. It's like clockwork. First meeting, you got 200 people. Second meeting, might be 75. Third council meeting, I said, you might have 10. And then what happens is, by the second, third month, there's nobody. And you know what they did on the subject matter? And they go, what? I go, nothing. Nobody's here. So they just shelve it and they move on. So I tell people, that's done by design. They know how to wait it out. And so if there's anything I could help with people, is explain to them. They get frustrated with the system. I said, don't ignore the system and turn around, turn your back and go about your life. I said, let me explain it to you how it works so you know how to maneuver in it and understand and break it down. That's one of the things I learned that I have a good knack for, is how to understand how someone's abilities. Because I tell people, there is no blanket approach. You have to be able to assess a person's situation and see where the comprehension level is and their ability to absorb information and tweak as needed. How I may present to you is not going to be the same way I'm going to present to this person. So the way the communications is exactly how they want it to be, confusing and unable for you to figure it out.
Oh, that's right. What are your thoughts about some of the candidates running, particularly the ones, well...
I'm free for all, you can ask whatever.
Well, I know about to say money, but we're talking about the city clerk's race. Only people who are actually money is Ana Rojas and Freddie Gomez. And obviously, I'm not interested in talking about them at the moment. I'm more interested about the city clerk's position. But it seems like there are at least a few candidates who look at this as a kind of stepping stone. They're very ambitious, and they're trying to do some things with it. What do you think is the most common misunderstanding about the city clerk's position that some folks who are neophytes would not get?
One thing they don't actually realize, the reason why the city clerk and city treasurer have a salary is because they're considered on par with a department head. They run an operating budget. And what I found, the chamber had a candidates forum. So that was the first opportunity I really got to hear all of them. Well, one of the candidates didn't appear, Monet Gavino. So I never got a real chance to have an understanding of where they're at this. They have no understanding that the city clerk runs a full functioning department. They not only have the external demands, with the outreach for the community, it's internally. And so when I answered the questions to them about the role, they said, what is needed? I go, well, there's two facets, internal and external. And no one understood what that meant. And I had to break it down to them. I go, they run a full functioning department. That is why they're paid a regular salary versus our mayor and city council, excluding the charter that changed it all. But that is why the mayor and city council come and go. They're supposed to be visionaries and come up with a vision and plan, and it's the city manager's role to therefore take that vision, formulate it into a tangible plan to implement. Right. But when we don't have visionaries, we're stuck in the situation we're in now, and always reactive versus proactive. But that is the one biggest misconception that people don't realize, and also to the level that the city clerk is involved, not just with the public. The city clerk is the center base for all departments. So in order for you to coordinate in between the record keeping, and we still haven't fully implemented to bring us up to where we should be, you have to understand how all the departments function. If you were to ask the rest of the candidates right now, what's the name of all the departments? How's the structure? I'm pretty sure not one of them, maybe me and Vera, would actually know. They really did not know it is a full-fledged operating department. So that's the biggest misconception that people have. They think they just do elections every 2 years. No, I've literally had people tell me that. And I said, no. There's other legislative actions, and it was obvious during the chamber's forum that they didn't even know the base core, which is the implementation of the legislative, official record keeping, and election official, and records management. They didn't understand any of that.
From the time of their taking over the city clerk's position when he ran back in 2015, 2016.
He was there for a year, just a year.
Yeah, and got recalled. The city clerk's position, it's only been, you're about to elect the 5th city clerk position.
Yeah.
There's been 5 of them. And at best, there's only been 2 professional ones.
Correct. Helen Calgary and Tanisha.
Exactly.
Yes.
And I've always wondered, why is that an elected position? Why not find, you have a set of criteria by which your candidate should have, and you choose amongst them. Why is that an elected position?
One of the things I learned from my old boss, the late city clerk, Helen Calgary, because that was a common question to ask, and she said the reason being it had to be the check and balance between the mayor and city council, because we do not have enough provisions in place because we're a smaller scale city that would make sure to keep it separate. And the prime example is the situation we're in right now. The fact that the mayor and city council controlled who they deemed to be hired as the chief deputy city clerk and who they deemed to appoint as the election official. You have a person who is not qualified. They're not qualified. And has botched our election process and the integrity of it. And instead of the city fixing it, they refused to, because that would acknowledge they made a mistake. And I said, this is the example I was given when I first started here when I was 17, was why there had to be that separation, because you cannot trust that our mayor and city council would do the right thing. And like when you said it's the fifth one, I go, yeah, I believe it was Marilyn Cortina, then Helen Kawagoy, and after Helen, it was Jim Deere, then Tony Chagaz. So this would be the fifth person. Yeah. But that's the main thing, is you cannot trust that our mayor and city council will do the right thing. When I first started the city, no one would think twice about that. Because everyone would, we had disagreements in mayor council, but for the most part it was functioning. But as the 90s went on into the 2000s, I was like, okay, now it's ever so apparent why they must be direct elected, because we cannot trust our elected officials. You know, we had the string of everybody going through jail, one after another, all under, you know, what the actions that we're doing with the city. So I didn't necessarily fully understand it until as our elected leaders changed over the years and how they were able to manipulate, including changing the municipal code for the ordinance. Are you familiar with the agenda?
Am I familiar with the Carson agenda, what it goes to?
Yes. So before, any official could just submit and request for an item to be placed on the agenda.
Right.
You just let the city manager know, I want this on there. City manager puts it on the next agenda. And during Jim Deere's tenure, they changed the Carson Municipal Code and altered it so that the mayor approves the agenda. Yes. Okay. So that's why when Albert Robles was in his heyday of like, approve, no, whatever, he even delayed our contract, putting it on the agenda. And everyone couldn't understand why Jim Deere didn't speak up against it. And he just laughed. And he said, why? I go, that's what happens when you don't do your research. They go, why? I go look at the ordinance in the municipal code, and you see all the numbers on the bottom. Those are the ordinance numbers that altered, amended that section. They go, yes. I go, if you look at the last one, look at who was mayor at the time. And he said, what? I go, it was Jim Deere. And everyone goes, I go, that's why he would never speak up about disputing that, because he never, I imagine he didn't want an unfavorable light be brought to his attention that it was actually not Albert Robles who did it. It was under his tenure. It's just that Albert was very aggressive about utilizing that.
And I recall during Mayor Deere's term, when he was mayor, he was so adamant at being an executive mayor at the time that it wasn't even built to be that. And I just found it weird.
That's a nice way of putting it. That was his timing of when he got on the council was honestly because of the turmoil that was happening. It was like he had already ran, I think 2 times prior to. And so when all that stuff happened with the elected officials between Fajardo, Deere, Montal, Frank, it was like perfect timing. It just kind of, and because it was so chaotic then, and him coming out looking like he was just the smooth thing. I'm here to bring us all together. We're going to sing Kumbaya. You know, it was just all timing. And so I know exactly what you're talking about during that time period, because it was, I would say, not sincere. For me, it felt. It just, nothing from anybody of us on the dice ever tend to feel sincere.
Okay. That was an interesting departure. what do you hope for the outcome to be after this election? What do you, not just in the city council race, city clerk's race, but in the city council race?
Honestly, I'm hoping and praying for a legitimate change. I'm vouching for Sharma Henderson. I actually met her because we were always kept going at the council meeting speaking. She was fighting for Stork Center, and I was fighting for the employees. And as a resident, that's how we literally met. And it just blew her mind. She's like, "Is this how it is?" Like I go, "This is exactly how it is." And so, I've seen some of the other individuals who are running for council. It scares me a little bit because we have each of our elected officials who have their heir apparent that they are pushing so hard for. And I know they would not be good because the fact that I tell people whether or not you have the skill set to be a council member, if your heart's not in the right place, and if you don't have a basic comprehension of what your role is, I said you're going to send us down this rabbit hole that's going to be in flames. And I'm genuinely worried because of the 5 people who are running, 4 of them, one has been out of touch for 20 years. 2 of them, 3 of them are just being pushed because each of the elected officials want their own candidate. And so we have a person who is able-bodied and sound mind and has awesome ideas, Sharma. And I tell people her background is nonprofit. And we talk about all the time about how can we help our city. How I used to talk with my late sister. How could we help the city with the resources that we have? I'm not talking about banking on additional. Try to make do with what we can and help restructure, reorganize till we get to that point where we can expand that. And that's the problem with the rest of the candidates. I heard no vision, nothing to substantiate.
If they spoke at all.
Well, that's another thing. 2 of the candidates, one of them for sure, I've yet to hear him speak. Freddie Gomez.
Exactly.
And it's the same with Monica Vino. I asked during the chamber forum, I put on the group chat, I said, were all the candidates invited? Because you guys, I noticed 2 candidates did not show up, and you guys never acknowledged them. Right. And someone asked me offline, why did you say that? And I said, well, rule of thumb, before you open up a candidates forum, you acknowledge everybody who's there, and you typically acknowledge those who could not be there, because they would have notified and say, our apologies, we had a scheduling conflict, or something of that nature, so they're acknowledged. And, but they didn't. They didn't acknowledge it, didn't mention them, nothing. Right. And so I thought that was a little odd, but I'm not surprised. But I would really want the community to hear the people, not vote for them because one is Jim Deere's girlfriend, and the other, one is Juwan's pushing for, and the random attorney who just moved here to Carson. Oh no, you know who he?
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, he just barely registered back in Carson in June. He was in San Pedro registered, Signal Hill before that. In a few years, I even challenged. He was removed as a candidate for a sec. I challenged. I
heard the challenge was made. I wasn't sure he got removed from it.
So the county initially removed him because I challenged it, his residency.
You mean for city council
clerk.
Or for city clerk?
Sorry, city clerk. He did initially set up his account for council, and then I noticed he changed it over once.
So is he officially running now because of
Yes. They added him back on because the city clerk's office said that he brought proof of a lease agreement that he was residing here in Carson.
Well, my thinking on that personally is that he's 26. He was 18 years old when he first registered to vote, and he was going here, there, everywhere, in terms of his education. To my mind, it's reasonable. Although I feel like he's probably over ambitious, trying to get everything done like right now.
I don't know him as an individual, but I'm not sure if you reviewed his Form 700. I thought it was, what caught my attention was on the paperwork he did disclose your sources of income. His sources of income was from those adult residential homes. But I thought it was odd that on the form, he purposely broke up the title onto the line where the address goes. And he purposely excluded the addresses on everything. So I researched it. The residential home that he said he's the executive director is in Carson, but on the long side. But that's also the address that he used on part of his paperwork for his voter registration. But according to the state of California Human Services site, that house is fully occupied. And his name is not listed as the deemed staff person. It was another lady who has the same, her last name is his middle name. And so I said, okay, this is not a good call when they exclude the addresses. And then he said he was a professor and different people who he had as references. It didn't take too hard to investigate and see that the individual he was using for his campaign was actually a worker at the university in Signal Hill that he just began working. I also had an issue with, I thought it was odd. I have never heard of a lawyer not state where they passed the bar. He put, have you seen his paperwork?
I have, and I called him out on it.
I said, a bar. And I told everyone, I go, did I read this wrong?
Yeah, he passed the bar in Vermont, or he said he passed it in California in a Twitter post. I kid you not. But the deal was, it was dated in April. And so he may have passed it, I don't know. I just know that when you look him up right now, at least when I looked it up back in early September, his name wasn't amongst the ones that passed the bar in California.
Correct. I wasn't. And also, too, as when he filed his paperwork, he hadn't passed the bar yet in Vermont.
You're right.
So he didn't get the notification until after the fact. It never goes, what do you mean? I said, it's misleading. I go, if a person does that just on this paperwork, that just goes to show me, what else are you willing to do? But there was a lot of discrepancies in the fact that up until June, he was registered in San Pedro. And, you know, I just said, okay, this isn't a good call. I know it falls in line with how Carson is, but it doesn't mean we don't need the next generation of, of the next officials who are going to go to jail.
The way the districts were drawn up, what are your thoughts about how that all went down? I mean, I think most people are happy that we switched to districting in Carson. May not be as happy as the way it was drawn up, and for I think obvious reasons. And you know, but what are your thoughts about how that all went down, and what could? If there's something different could have been done, I think on the city clerks. I don't think so. No power over that. What are your thoughts about that?
I was for district because I actually agreed to join the lawsuit. I was one of the plaintiffs, and I agree, and I believed in it, and that's why when they came back and asked me again, I agreed because we weren't not going to change my side of the town. I live in the Patch area. We're ignored. We're sandwiched between the channel and the commercial district and the refineries, and we're ignored year after year after year. Yet the money comes in right through our area, but doesn't stay here whatsoever. And so I believe that we were past the time of having elected officials that would actually fight for citywide. And I wanted accountability. You are fine and responsible for all of this. You were responsible to advocate. So I believed in it. That's why I joined it. I did not agree with how they were doing the districting. It was very clear. They gerrymandered it. They totally disregarded and even got another demographer because they did not like what the demographer was providing about how you use it and how the guidelines and everything. They literally, my district is the east side of the city, and we geographically are separated from everybody. So it's obvious we are separate. They literally cut the very north tip around Cedric Hicks' block, his house neighborhood, and included it with the whole east side. So he went from there, the refinery lands, which are the largest parcels of land in the city, and then the east side of the city, east the Patch and the Dominguez area, to make his district. And then for Lula's, they carved around her block. And I don't know if anyone has told you what the nickname some of the residents had called her district.
The middle finger?
Huh?
The middle finger or the big fuck you?
The dick. So, so I had multiple residents tell me that, and I said, "Oh dear God!" And they said, "Why?" I go, "Now I can never see it not." But it literally, her neighborhood, it cuts around hers, and it goes straight down, and then it has the base, which takes the southern port, and then you have Jawan, we always knew because geographically and the way you look at the structure of the residences, and he would be by himself. And then obviously Jindir, they carved down. But it has been beyond frustrating because the city was not a good advocate of explaining. The city clerk tried, but they also shut her down as well about trying to educate the public about the districts. To this day, I still have residents who don't understand why going down to Bonita, why they are in two separate districts when they're the same neighborhood. But they had to snippet it off so that they can create, to show the consecutive district going down to include the southern for Lula's district. So I believe in districts, but I do not believe and do not agree with how they came to the districts.
This current map.
Yes.
Right.
So I'm waiting for, obviously a census came out, technically they're supposed to reevaluate and restructure, but knowing how this city council is.
Right. All right, last question, and sort of a recap. Tell me what voters should know about you and your candidacy.
What they don't know about me?
What they should know.
What they should know is that I'm the only candidate that actually understands and knows what the city clerk's office is supposed to do. I'm also the only candidate who could actually hit the ground running on day one without the city having to hire an election consultant to show me what to do, like what we have right now. And the thing is, I understand the internal aspect, because the one thing, like the early question you mentioned, was one thing people don't know. They don't know it's a fully operating department. And the fact that that city clerk has, in order to do their job from the record keeping and legislative action, has to know what all the departments do. The outside does not understand that. And also one thing people don't realize, it's a one-year term, meaning the city clerk, the next city clerk coming in, will immediately or will already be a little bit behind doing all the paperwork and the resolutions and all the legislative action to set it up for the next election, 22. They do not have time. And actually, even before that, you have the budget process. Elections in November, so they'll be certified by December, probably most likely sworn in January. The budget process, where all the departments submit their initial budget, is January. And they start the budget workshops in March. So between January to March, you'll be going back and forth with the finance department. Somebody externally is not going to understand what they need to do in order to get it done. And also, too, the other candidates having no city clerk background, I go, well, I take that back. I think the only one closest would be Vera, who have an understanding about the different state mandates. The other three candidates have no idea with the Voters' Rights Act that was being implemented that under our provision. And also, too, we don't want to end up like City of Compton, where they went $1 million. How did the budget be so far off? But also, too, is them not understanding the rules under Secretary of State's office, even with voter registration. There's a lot of different financial components that need to be addressed, and none of them would be able to understand it or know that and hit the ground running. And what's going to happen is it's going to be exactly where we're at right now, where the city had to hire an election consultant firm to help our election official. Instead of just hiring an election official, they could have done that, but they were adamant about, no, this is our guy. Right. And so we don't have the luxury to sit there and play this waiting game for these other individuals to try to come around their learning curve. Right. They don't even understand. They couldn't even name the departments. I highly doubt they would be able to hit the ground running and understand. One of the things I have is that institutional knowledge. I know what has worked, what has not worked. I've learned from others who say, don't even bother going this route because of yada, yada, yada. You know, I always tell people, you build off of what's there. You bring to the table your skill sets, assess the situation, figure out a plan of attack, and be able to implement it. These individuals can't even show up for a forum because they're afraid to face people. So as a resident, I'm bothered by that because dealing with the Dominguez channel right now, this is what happens when you hire and you elect elected officials. When the time comes when you need them, you end up suffering. And that's where we're at right now. And that's the image that a lot of us residents really view all of our elected officials. They failed us. But now it's impacting us physically, our health. And so now, like I said on a post to Juwan, I go, I will never forgive the city for this. You can screw up our organization, but you've impacted our health. So I will never forgive you guys for that, because there was no reason for this. But
well, thank you very much for coming out down here and
no problem.
Speaking with us. I appreciate it. Go ahead.